Welcome to Photoshop. Photoshop is an amazing program that can do a lot of things. It works really well with photo-based images. Now in Photoshop there's generally 3 to 6 ways to get the exact same result. So one thing you will find if you do research on YouTube or on the web or other sources or books or magazines is everybody's going to tell you this is the way to do it. The reality is there are lots of ways to do it. Some are more efficient than others, but if it gets you at your destination, it's all good. Now as we have the open screen for Photoshop, we will see that we have some options here. We can create a new document, we can open a document. We have the buttons down on the left to do that. We also can access the same thing under the file pull down menu, and we have keyboard shortcuts to do it. So as you can see, lots of ways to do the same thing. So I'm going to click on create new, and with this we have a number of different presets that we can choose for it. For the project that we're going to be working on, we have a specific set of dimensions and resolution that we are going to use for this, and we're going to set the document up at 6 inches wide and 9 inches tall. So we're creating a portrait orientation document. So 6 wide, 9 tall. We're doing it high resolution, so we want it at 300 pixels per inch because we need the option to be able to print these out, not just look at them on screen. But even if we were only looking at them on screen, now that most people have HD or 4K or even better displays, having a higher pixel count will give us a better looking image. So that's each one of the little dots of light that make up our image when we look at it on screen, or the dots that are used to print out the color when we print it on our output device. We're going to leave the color mode as RGB, and we will leave our background contents as white. So it will start with white. We're not going to care at this point in time about color profiles, and we will leave the pixels as square. So as you can see, there's a lot of options to consider. And as you grow more advanced and knowledgeable in your digital imaging skills, you are going to learn how each one of these things will impact what you are doing. If you do a lot of digital photography, you may be changing it from 8-bit to 16-bit or even 32-bit color as you work with it. You will almost certainly change your color profile to match your output device or screen that you are working on. If you do high-end print work, the print shops that you are dealing with will tell you or even give you a color profile to install on your computer. So there's a lot of things as you become more skilled and advanced that you will be using in this. But right now, the only 4 things we care about are 6 inches wide, 9 inches tall, 300 for the resolution, and set to RGB color. So you may have heard at some point, well, I have to use CMYK if I'm printing, I can't use RGB. The reality is we can use RGB because our printers can transpose that color information and give us the result we need. All of our digital files we're working with are natively in the RGB color mode anyway, so it just makes sense to leave it there. It simplifies things for us. So 6, 9, 300 RGB are the 4 key things we're looking for when we create this new document. And then once I do that, you will see it now brings up this screen. So I'm going to close the Learn tab over there. I don't need that to give myself a little bit more screen real estate. And now we are in Photoshop ready to work. In Photoshop, we need to orient ourselves to how the user interface looks. A good part about Adobe programs is there's a lot of overlap and continuity between the different software programs. So once you master one, it's going to make it much easier for you to learn additional programs from Adobe because they have a lot of shared interface elements. So across the top of the screen we have the control bar, which is a contextual palette or menu because it will change based on whatever tool I select. We see how the options change. So that's how we're able to get different options for the different tools that we have. Now the tools, as they run down the left hand side of the screen, the top tools are selection tools, and then we have the crop tool, and then we have the healing brush, and then we have the paintbrush and clone stamp and history brush and eraser and gradient tool. So we have a lot of different tools available to us while we are working here in Photoshop. Now, as we look at the tools and work our way down the list, we're not going to learn about all of them. We're just going to focus on some of them, the key ones that we need for working on our project. Now, another thing that you will notice when we look at the tools is next to some of the tools, there is a little triangle in the corner. Now, something else happens if I hover too long over a tool, and we can see that it gives us a little animated tooltip giving us kind of a guide of how that tool is going to work. But if I click on a tool and click and hold down, you will see that it gives me additional options for that tool. There's also a letter next to that tool. One thing about Photoshop is if you master some of the keyboard shortcuts, it's going to make you much more efficient while you are working in the tool. And that's really important because at the end of the day, it comes down to billable hours. If you can get a job done faster, your hourly rate is effectively higher. So mastering some of the keyboard shortcuts will work. The tools typically will have a shortcut of a single letter, and sometimes you need to use shift with that letter to access it because there's just so many different tools. So we can see the move tool, which allows us to move things around on screen. We'll see how that is deployed in a little bit. The marquee tool, we'll be using that. The lasso tool is here. We have the polygon and magnetic ones. Those work nicely too. So then we have our object selection or quick select tool, the magic wand. So notice we can get to those with W, marquee was M. So sometimes the letter that's assigned to it makes sense. Like the paintbrush will be B, so we can see we have our different brush tools that we can work with. And the stamp tool will be S. The eraser tool will be E. Gradient tool is G. We also see under the gradient is where the paint bucket is hidden. So if you've used other paint programs during your time working on computers, whether it's MS Paint or SciPaint or other painting style programs, a paint bucket tool is a pretty common tool, but it's hidden under the gradient. So that's just something that's good to know. And as we go through some of these other tools, we'll be using like the text tool down here. Text tool has a couple of different options with it as well. So continuing down our tools, we'll see that we have these two squares. This is our foreground color and our background color. We can see that our document's background color currently is white, foreground color is set to black. So if I were to use something like the paintbrush, we can see right now it looks to be it's a pretty small brush. And across the top I have different brush options available to me, so I could now make this brush bigger, which is what I will do. So we can see now the brush, as you can see, the mark I made has a fuzzy edge to it, and that would be based on the kind of brush that I am using. So I'm using a soft round brush because it has a 0 hardness. If I move the hardness up to 100%, we'll see that now that brush has a crisp, sharp edge. So typically when we work with brushes, we change the size and we change the hardness on those brushes as we're working. Now, we can make our brushes bigger and smaller on the keyboard using the square bracket keys. So above the return or enter key on the keyboard, you will see there are the two square brackets, left bracket and right bracket, and they allow you to make your brush smaller or make your brush bigger. So sometimes the keyboard shortcut's nicer than clicking on the brush options up here and changing it. So again, my foreground color is black. Now if I look over on the right side where I have these other windows, I have my color window or color palette. So we use those terms kind of interchangeably. So under the window pull down menu, we have access to whatever documents are open, plus then we have all of our different palettes. But it's under the window pull down menu. So sometimes you'll be like, well, where's my palette menu? Because it's been referred to as the color palette or the layer palette. So the terms kind of get a little bit interchangeable in that sense. Now I can look at my document here and it's showing me the properties of the document that I'm working on. I have my layers. We'll be using adjustments in the coming sessions and doing some fun work with that. Now if I want to change my color here, I can see I can move through here and it changes, and I can move up here and that changes things as well. Right now, I'm using a hue cube to do this. More traditional view might be to use the RGB color sliders. So if I like doing that, it also shows me that RGB color information, or I can just click on this nice rainbow down here until I find a color that gives me what I want. I could choose my color wheel, which gives me the color triangle. So once I choose the color range that I'm working with, I can then choose how I want to work with that color: more saturated, less saturated, lighter, darker. So the color triangle is one of my favorite options for working with color because it's certainly easier than trying to pull HSB sliders, RGB sliders. It gives a visual representation of what you're doing while you're working. So I'm really a fan of that, and I'm happy they finally added this color wheel, or I think of it as the color triangle, but we have the triangle within the wheel. But I've been wanting that in Photoshop for a long time, so I'm pretty excited that as a newer addition to the program gives me what I want. I also can just click on the foreground color and it brings up the traditional color picker screen, so I can go and choose whatever color I am looking for, and I can pull that up and then I can work with it. Now that to me is a little bit slower because I have to click over here, it comes up, I have to click OK, it goes away. The one advantage of the color picker is I get all of my numerical color information. Again, as you become more experienced and more advanced working in our digital tools, you may decide that you want to understand it to a greater depth, but also some programs and tools require you to use this information. If you do web design work, you need to be able to be comfortable working with RGB colors as well as the hex color, as we see a hex color designation down at the bottom. So I can see how that color information changes because it's a letter number combination, 6 characters long. So we can use our hexadecimal color information, RGB color values. So there's really just a lot of good options available to you. And the more you know, the more powerful and effective you're going to be when you're working in your different tools, in your different disciplines, producing amazing media projects. Now, one of the really great features in Photoshop is the ability to work with layers. So currently we can see we have what is called the background layer. So this document has one layer with it right now. I'm in the layers palette. And down at the bottom of the screen here, we can see that there's a number of icons that I have access to. The one with the plus is create a new layer. Now we have a little garbage can next to it. We can create layer groups or folders to hold it. We can do adjustments, we can do masks and effects, and we can lock layers together. So the create new layer icon in times past used to look like a page with its corner turned, but now it makes more sense that it looks like this. So if I click there, we can see it added a new layer. There's something different about this layer. Looking at this layer, I can see it's got a little checkerboard pattern. Now these eyeballs next to it control the visibility for our given layers. So if I zoom back out, if I turn off the bottom layer, it goes away. Now we see this checkered board pattern. That indicates that this layer is transparent. So as I work with this and draw on this layer and create marks on this layer, we can see that now the previous layer still shows through. Now one thing is, if I try and move these layers, I can't do it because the background layer, when I try and do that, we notice it has this little icon next to it. It says this layer is locked. And looking up here, I can see that it's locked on transparency and moving, etc. Now this layer, we see none of that is the case. Now if I add yet one more layer, change my color so I can see what is happening. So now I can draw on that layer, and now I can just simply drag these layers around. So one thing that's really nice when we're working in Photoshop is that it is really flexible to manipulate our content. Now you may work on your project and get up to 5, 10, 15 layers and think, wow, that's a lot. The reality is most people who spend a lot of time working in Photoshop will regularly have documents that are 100 layers deep. So that's not unheard of. But at that point, you probably should start using layer groups. So you start putting them into folders, and very importantly, you probably want to name your layers so you can figure out what is going on. And to name a layer, I just click on the text into it, and I will just call this one green since I have green as a dominant color. Go to this layer and call that orange. So it really is that simple. It should be somewhat intuitive when you're working. I can move the layers around, but the background layer is always going to be the background layer. It's special. It has unique properties because I can't move it, and it's opaque. If I get rid of the background layer, we can see that now we have these two layers and it's transparent. So we have a lot of options. So we have tools on the left, we have our palettes on the right, we have our layer palette down here at the bottom. We can move the layers around, and that's really important. Next, we're going to take a look at using some photographic images and how we can work with those and start combining them together into a single document. Back to the comment I made in the beginning, which there are multiple ways to do the same thing in Photoshop, is how to open an existing image. So if I download an image to my computer from the web and want to work with it, I need to open it. Now I can go under File and I can choose Open. I can see I have a keyboard shortcut here, Open, and I can select that. And now it gives me an option. I can find documents on the cloud if I had saved documents into my cloud account with Adobe, but I have not, as it's clearly evident. But I can go onto my computer and go look for documents that I have on my computer. And when I do that, currently I do have one document in the cloud, but I'm going to go to my desktop where I've downloaded my files. Now, I have not authorized Photoshop to access my desktop before, so now it's prompting me to do so. So I'll say, sure, yeah, I want to do that. So Mac OS Catalina is really strict about what programs can access documents and what they can do with those documents. So that's something to keep in mind while you are working. Now I can see I have a number of documents here. So I could just go and choose one document and open it, or I could choose a different document and open it. But I also, if I hold down Command or Control, I can select a non-continuous group of images. If I click on the first one and hold Shift, it can select all of the images. Now, if I look close here, I will see some images are PNGs, some images are JPEGs, and some images here are PSD or Photoshop documents. So they're documents that have been opened in Photoshop previously and had some work done to them, and then they've been saved. So I'm going to open just a couple of them to start with this. And then we're going to look at something else as we work with it. So we can see it's thinking. We get a little icon and beach ball going on there. So now I have two images that I am working with. And if I go under properties, I can see the pixel dimensions or resolution of this. Now if I go back to my main document here and go to the main document and select nothing, it now shows me that my document itself is 1800 pixels wide, 2700 pixels tall. It's the simple math of 300 times 6 and 300 times 9. So that gives me the details on that. Notice also it's at 300 pixels per inch. Now this gun is set at 72 pixels per inch and it's 1024 pixels wide. And the reason I'm pointing some of these things out is most images, when you find them online or take them with a digital camera, they will be saved at 72 pixels per inch. So you really have to look at the overall pixel dimensions. So then when you put them into your project, they're not so small that then you scale them up and then they look ugly. They'll be showing a lot of artifacts, we'll see pixelization, and generally it doesn't look very good. Now Photoshop is quite skilled at scaling images within reason, but if you do any dramatic things, you are going to be able to tell that the images all came from different sources and have been resized badly, and it's not going to work well for you. So we can see that this picture of Lincoln here is only 800 pixels wide. Even though it's at 300 pixels per inch, the overall pixels are 800 and it's 1000 pixels tall. So going back to this document, we can see that this is 2700 pixels tall and this is only 1000, so it's about 1/3 the size. So if I made this fill my image, it's not going to look as good as if I started with a higher quality or higher pixel count, higher resolution image in the first place. Now sometimes you will decide that you want to take an image and add it to your project, so you just drag it from a desktop window and you drag it in, and we'll see it gives me a plus, which indicates, hey, it's going to do something. And now it's showing that I can scale it to fit and adjust the size while I put it in and work with it. So I'm just going to leave it as is for now. And this image, it has little X through it and it has handles on it telling me I can do something with it. Up at the top of the screen I can see I have a circle with a line through it, universal for cancel. The check mark says accept, so I can cancel and not take this image, or I can accept it. Now I can scale that image. I did want it to be bigger while I put it in, and I can click the check mark, hit enter on the keyboard, both will give me the same result, and now that image has been added to my document. I need to point something out here. We can see the previous layers, and we see this layer, and it shows it has a little icon in the corner, a little page with the corner turn and a square on it. And that icon indicates that I have now created what Photoshop calls a smart object. Smart objects are wonderful. They are great, but they do have a couple things we need to be aware of. So if I've created a smart object, what that means is if I just save out this document that I'm working on, and because it has multiple layers, it will have to save as a Photoshop document or a .psd. If I don't also keep a copy of this White House image that I drug into my document, then when I reopen this, it won't have access to the image information of the White House file. So in that sense, smart objects can be problematic to work with if you're a drag and drop kind of person. But if you don't drag and drop, and if you add things in some of the techniques we're going to look at next, then that won't be a problem. But if you make a project folder, you put all of your image assets into it that you are working on, which I would say is a good plan and idea, then if you do drag something in to use it as a smart object, it's not going to affect you. Now, smart objects also have some other things, because now with this layer, if I were to say, go grab the eraser tool, we'll see that it's telling me, nope, can't erase. But if I go to this other layer, grab the eraser tool, make it big so we can see what's going on, it works just fine. So smart objects, I can't erase in it. It tells me the smart object must be rasterized before proceeding. Edit contents will no longer be available. Rasterize the smart object. So then you're like, whoa, that's a lot of language I haven't heard before. No big deal. It's not the end of the world. So if I go click on OK there, it's now rasterized. If I zoom in, we'll see that the smart object icon is gone, and now I can happily erase. But I've now lost all the advantage of using a smart object. So more advanced techniques and processes working in Photoshop, you will regularly get in the practice of using smart objects because they can do some really useful things as you work. But for our purposes, we don't really need smart objects, and if anything, they're going to make things a little bit more challenging because we'll keep getting these messages of, oh, you have to rasterize this. And we're like, enough already, Photoshop, I know what I'm doing. So don't tell me that. Going back into the Lincoln file here, we'll see Lincoln is a background layer. So if I try and erase Lincoln, and I'm going to make this really apparent that it's happening while I do it. So, whoop, I didn't get the color that I wanted. I want to set my background color to red. Oh, and I set it to red, and we'll see the color is gray. Now, one of the things you will remember that I mentioned when creating your document, 6 inches wide, 9 inches tall, 300 pixels per inch, and RGB. But if I look up here, this document isn't in RGB. This document is in Grayscale. It's 8-bit Grayscale, that's good, but it's Grayscale. So we have to transform that. Now I can get to that under mode. We'll see that there's even more options than you may have realized. I only pointed out RGB and CMYK, but we can see we have a lot of other options that we could work with. So I'm going to just transform it to RGB. Now the background is going to be red, and if I use the eraser tool, it reveals that background color. So by setting the background color to something, we can see it's behaving that way. Now if I use the paintbrush and paint on top, we can see how we're painting with the foreground color. So erasing here, if I just go back and set my colors to default, clicking the little tiny icon with the black and white square on it will reset the colors to default. Now if I use the eraser tool, I hit E on the keyboard to get to it, it now erases to white, which we would expect because the background color is indeed set to white. But I want this image of Lincoln to have a transparent background. But I can't do that while this is a background layer. So I have a few options. I can change it so this isn't a background layer anymore. I can bring this into my other document, and then I can clean up the background at that point. And personally, for our purposes, I'm going to say that's often the easiest way to do that. And to accomplish that task, I'm going to use the lasso tool. And with the lasso tool, I just draw the area I want to select. Now, I'm not being really exact with what I'm doing. I'm just kind of roughly indicating around the edges of Lincoln. And as I do that, you will see it added this little blinking line. Now, these little black and white lines as they move around are referred to as the marching ants in the Adobe user manual. So do what you will with that, but we can see that anytime we have this line that is blinking and moving, that is referred to as a selection. So we can see everything inside of that is what I have selected. Now, once I have made a selection, what I can do is I can go and choose copy, and I can copy that selection that I've made. And if I go into my other document here, and now I have an option to paste that selection. Now, an important thing to learn, especially if you're new to working on keyboards, is we have cut, copy, paste, and undo. Now, the keyboard commands that they align with are Command Z is undo your previous action. Command X is going to be cut. Command C is copy. Command V is paste. Command P is print. It's not paste. Now, if you study your keyboard, you will see Z, X, C, and V are the lower 4 letters on the keyboard, so it's convenient that they're all located in that place. So if your left hand is on your keyboard, you can use Command Z, Command X, Command C, or Command V. Now, if you are working on Windows, it would be Control instead of Command. So instead of having this little clover icon like we do on the Mac OS, on Windows, then we would be using the Control key to do it. So all of the keyboard shortcuts on Photoshop map exactly the same between Mac and Windows. You just swap out Command versus Control and Option versus Alt. So if we see that something is referring to Command Option Z, then that icon represents Option. That is, we do that on the Mac. On Windows, we would use Alt, so it'd be Control Alt Z. And here, Command Shift Z, we see the up arrow is for Shift, but on Windows it would be Control Shift Z. But all the letters and the modifier keys map pretty much one-to-one between Mac and Windows. We just substitute Command versus Control and Option versus Alt. So just something to pay attention to while you are working on your projects. Now, if I paste, which is Command or Control V, we can see how it pasted in. We can also see the size of it, where we knew that this was approximately 1/3 the size of what the main document is. Now if I switch to the Move tool, you see how I can now use that Move tool. Lincoln shows up in a layer here, so I'm going to name it Abe and put him in. And now I can position him wherever I want into my document. Now he's got a bunch of extra fluff around him, and that's what I want to get rid of next. Now while I'm working, I may want to zoom in on this area so that I can better see what I'm doing. Now we can use the magnifying tool to do that. We'll see it also has zoom with it, and if I go under my view pull down menu, I will see that zoom in and out are also available there. So Command plus and Command minus, or Control plus, Control minus, will fit it or zoom it in to what we are doing. So those would be something that you could work with as well. You can also hold down the Alt or Option key and use the scroll wheel on your mouse to do it. Now we can see that I lost track of Abe while I'm doing this, but the hand tool is how we're able to then move around this document. We can also gain access to the hand tool by holding down the space bar. So no matter which tool is currently active, so if I have the Move tool active, but if I hold down space bar, my tool changes to a hand, and now I can move that so that I can change what portion of my document I am currently looking at. So Command plus, Command minus, Control plus, Control minus to zoom in and out, space bar to give you the hand to move with it, or Option Alt and the scroll on your mouse will zoom in and out as well. So again, as I keep pointing out, we have lots of ways to do the same thing in Photoshop. There's not just one way. So if someone tells you it's like, this is how you have to do it, say, okay, but there's probably another way. Just keep that in mind. So I have gone and selected the Magic Wand tool. So we're going to look at the quick selection, the object selection, quick selection, and Magic Wand tools now as a way to remove the backgrounds from our artwork. Now with the Magic Wand tool, this used to be kind of, when this came on as a tool in Photoshop, it's like, wow, that's truly magic, because it used to be that you would zoom all the way in, and then you would use the eraser tool with a nice small eraser tool, and you would manually have to try to remove the background. So painting your way around the whole image, which if we turn off everything, we can see it now reveals the transparent pixels or background. So that was a pain and not a lot of fun. So I'm going to undo that there. I'm also going to just add a new layer, and I'm going to choose a obnoxious color, and I'm going to fill that layer with a solid color. Now to fill with the foreground color, we hold down the Alt or Option key and hit delete on the keyboard. If we want to fill with our background color, it's Command Delete. So now we can see in the layer palette that showed it filled it with white. If I hold down Option Delete, it fills it with green. And the reason that I am doing that is now when I use, well, I don't want to erase on that layer. Let's go here on the Abe layer and erase. Now we can see progress that we are making. We can see that result. So using the eraser tool is a rather inefficient way of doing it. So instead, what I am going to do is try and use the magic wand, and let's see. So the magic wand looks for continuous areas of the same value. This is a black and white image, which does simplify that process. We can see it got, well, not quite right, because now if I hit delete, we just got rid of all the light areas on Lincoln's face. So the magic wand may not be as magic as we would hope here. Now this time that looks a little bit better, but it is going to be erasing his shirt. So again, probably not going to be the best option. Now I can cycle through my wand tools by holding down Shift and hitting W, and we can see we have Object Select and Magic Wand, Quick Select tool. Now the Quick Select tool is a little bit smarter. I click and drag the area I'm trying to select, and we can see that then it uses its AI to try to determine what is that section that you are looking for. And we can see it got pretty close. It's not selecting other stuff. So that's good as a way to go about doing this. Now, as I'm selecting this and adding more to it, now this select tool that I'm working with, we'll see it has a plus on it. And if I go to my tool options, we'll see we're using the plus version, which means keep adding to that selection. Now, I'm going to recommend, if you're using the Quick Select tool, is you select around part of your image and then you commit and hit delete. You don't want to keep going all the way, because eventually it's going to select too much. Now, the good part about the Quick Select tool is if it does select a little too much in something that we don't want, so if we want to push it out a little bit, so if I want to reclaim that corner of his beard, I can do that by holding down Option or Alt, and when I do that, it changes from a plus. We can see up here it changes to the minus version, and I put my cursor right on that line of marching ants, and I just kind of push it out a little bit. Okay, now that pushed it too far, so we'll use plus to try and push it in. So what we're able to do when we work with the Quick Select is we can kind of try to give it some assistance. My recommendation is always err on the side of leaving too much. So see how I can kind of push that shoulder back where it was trying to cut out. Leave too much, and then you can go back and fine tune the cutting with your eraser, because these automatic selection tools are never going to be perfect. They're going to get us close, but they won't be perfect. Now if I hit delete, we can see that went good. Now if I go under the select pull down menu, we'll see we have certain options. The one I'm looking for here is deselect. I don't want anything selected now, and that happens to be Command D for deselect. Command A, of course, is select all, or Control D, Control A if you are working on Windows. So now I can deselect. If I look close, I'll see that it did leave this little kind of ghost of a line. This is from the selection edge, has a feathered edge to it, so it's leaving that. So that is then a really good use of just give myself a fat eraser and I can delete that line. Now sometimes that won't be an issue, but other times you will find that by having that extra line, when you composite your images, you end up with all of these artifacts from where you cut things out. Now we can see at the corner of his beard here didn't select as well as I would like. So I'm going to zoom in on that, make my eraser a whole lot smaller, and now I can erase around his beard and clean that up. And now zoomed in, I notice the corner of his ear could use a little cleanup as well. So this is how I'm able to get to a good selection. Now I just need to get rid of the rest of it on the side over here. And let's see how effective it is in there. It's pretty close, but if I hit delete, we'll quickly see that, whoops, we just gave him surgery to move his ears, so we probably don't want to do that. So remember, we hold down Alt or Option, go onto that selection line, and I push it out so that I can reclaim it. And notice it pushes it, and then it bounces back where it's using the algorithm to try and figure out, well, what did you really mean when you were doing that? Once again, I'll hit delete. Controller Command D to get rid of my selection. I got this faint ghost line around the edge, so I want to get rid of that. So I can go back to my eraser, make my eraser bigger using the square bracket tool, and then I can clean up that edge. Now I can hold down Alt and scroll in, so that keeps me located where I want to be. Shrink my eraser tool down, so it's going to be more effective for trimming around the hair where it did not effectively select it. So you can drive yourself nuts trying to get your selection to be absolutely perfect before you hit delete. But my recommendation is going to be get it close, but have it a little bit fat, and then you can always clean it up afterwards. So now if we zoom out, we can see there is Lincoln, nicely extracted from his background. Turn off the green, and he sits in front of the White House. Pretty awesome. Moving over to the gun document here. I'm going to select all, which is Command or Control A. I'm going to just copy that, jump over to our main document. I will choose paste, puts that document in, or puts that in. I'm going to turn on the background so we can better see what's going to happen. Now this time, I'm going to take a look at the object selection tool, and I'm going to drag around this tool and select it, and we can see that that got really, really close and effective. Now just for comparison, let's grab the Magic Wand tool. If I try to select the background, we can see that, well, that's not really going to be effective. If I try and, whoa, select the gun. So the Magic Wand tool on an image where we don't have a really clear designation of what is object, what is background, we can see that it fails pretty miserably. Now, there are other ways to go about doing this where I could use the polygon or magnetic lasso tool, and you click your way around. So sometimes, especially if you have hard-edged objects, you can just use the polygon lasso tool, and that works. Quick select tool, let's see if I try and see, the quick select is kind of failing on this one. So Object Select, which is the newest kit on the block for our selection tools, seems to be working pretty effectively. And that time it didn't work as well, so let's try again. So it's amusing that I got my best results on the first go. There we go. That worked a little bit better. So with this object select, I'm going to then zoom in a little bit, maybe not quite that far, and we'll see that it's close but not quite. So I want to try and smooth it out. Let's see if we can combine. So we'll just kind of push this edge out, see if we can combine that, and then that's working pretty good. Now if I switch to and hold down Alt or Option, push in where I don't want it to select that, use the plus to, oop, that didn't work as well. So we might need to let it push out a little bit. Now our select tool, we can also shrink it down. Well, so because there's no real distinction between those areas here, it's getting lost where the object is going into shadow. So we're going to have to clean that up manually afterward, but that's not the end of the world. And I'm going to allow that to happen there as well. Let's see if we can push this just a little bit to reclaim, because we don't want it to, nope, too far. We don't want it to be, and to undo when it selects too far, I'm just simply using Command Z is part of it. So this being a mechanical object or a machined object, if I were to use some of the other tools, I might be able to generate even better path or mask around it. But it also depends on how I'm going to fit it into my document. So if it's going to be relatively small, I can get away with not having to be as precise of that with that edge. So it's really not wanting to select that. So even though we have these tools that get us close, they don't always get us 100% to where we need to go. So this is going to allow me to show one more option that is available to us, and that is called the quick mask. Now, quick mask is down here, but if I hit Q on the keyboard or click to edit in quick mask, you'll see that it now turned that red. And what it's done is it's showing me here's the mask around my object, hit Q, it goes away. But if I look at red is where it's not selected, where I can see my artwork is the selection. So if I use my eraser tool, let's just go a little bit bigger because that will work fine. I can paint my selection. Now, one thing that's kind of nice when we are working in Photoshop is I can have so many different ways to get to my destination. Now, the same way that I'm using the eraser to erase red that encroached a little too far for what I want, so it's going to cut it badly, I can now use my paintbrush, shrink it down so it fits in here, and I can paint with red, so now I can reclaim the background. So I'm painting that selection here, just using a steady continuous movement of the mouse. Now this is a time where if you have a drawing tablet plugged in, it makes your life a lot easier because in my opinion it's much easier to use a stylus to do that than it is a mouse, but because I don't have that at the moment, I'm going to stick with using my mouse. Now if I go into under the barrel here, I'm going to have to do a little, as it falls into shadow, I have to do a little bit of guessing as to exactly where that ornamentation ends on the gun. So this is an image of the gun that was used to assassinate President Lincoln. And that's part of the theme of these images. We have Lincoln in the White House and John Wilkes Booth and the gun, so you're able to composite them together. Now I want to cut out where this trigger area is, and I can paint it, but I could also use a selection. Or not. I forgot it's not going to work quite the same while we're in the quick mask here. But there would be some additional options that we could look at. I could use one of the lasso tools, polygonal lasso tool, or I could even use the pen tool to draw the shape because this is being an even and curved shape. Using the pen tool would allow me to create a path that I could then turn into a selection. So I am going to paint out the perimeter of these two areas, and You can see I need to shrink my brush to get all the way down into that corner. And if I grab the paint bucket tool, I can fill that. Now, I'm also noticing it left a little bit of a line there, and that line is because if I look at my brush settings, my brush apparently it should have covered that because it had 100% hardness, so it shouldn't have had an edge, but I can now just paint back over that edge to make sure it doesn't give me any artifacting. Now if I get out of my quick mask and the icon down here at the bottom left, we can see that icon where it now is dark. If I hit Q, it's no longer dark, and now it shows it's looking at the lines. So quick mask is a phenomenally effective tool for making our selections, and now we have pretty closely selected the gun, and if I hit delete, we'll see I just deleted the gun. So let's undo that. So what's happening is the gun is the active selection, but if I look under my select pull down menu, we will see an option to inverse that selection. And when I inverse that selection, I now see marching ants at the edge and marching ants around the object, and if I hit delete, now it leaves behind just the firearm. And then I can simply hit Command D for deselect. I'll turn off the green layer, pull back Lincoln, and we can see there it is. So we've brought the gun into the picture. We have Abe in the picture. We're off to a good start. I'm going to open one of the other images here, and I will open the Lincoln PSD file. And in this file, we'll notice something a little bit different, and that it says layer 0. So this has been changed, so it's no longer a flat layer with a background on it, but instead it is a layer, like adding in new layers, and that allows it to have transparency, which is why it had to be saved as a PSD. Another way that we can move a layer of artwork between documents is I can take the thumbnail, the image in the layers palette, and drag it to the document I want to add it to, and we will see how it puts it into that file. So if I were to grab the gun that we just cut its background out and drag it to that Lincoln file, put it here, we'll see how it adds that gun to that file. So that's one way beyond copy pasting that we can move layers between documents. So we drag it up to the document's name in the top of the screen. Now I'm also noticing as I work on this, one thing that I probably should do is save, because it says untitled one. So that tells me that this has not been saved. So I can go and choose save, and I have options to save to cloud, which I'm not going to do, or I can save it to my computer. So as I save it to my computer, I want to see exactly where it's going, and I'm going to put it on the desktop, not in this folder right now. And I'll just call it Abe Poster. The format that we're saving in is natively as Photoshop. That allows us to maintain our layers, transparency, etc. If I were to choose one of the other formats like JPEG or PNG, then we're going to lose access to those. Also see there's a whole lot of other documents you can save. Again, as you become more experienced and dive deeper into working with digital images, you are going to learn about more of these and how you will use them in different applications. Now at this point I can hit save. Gives me an option. It's like, hey, maximize compatibility, blah, 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 blah. And if you don't want to see that again, you just click don't show again and click on OK. Document's been saved. Photoshop is relatively stable these days. It's not like in years past where Photoshop was a crashing machine, that it crashed all the time. So you would do something, save, do something, save. You pretty much had your left hand on the keyboard. So you were either hitting Command Z to undo or Command S to save continuously as you worked. That was a pretty common thing, but now not so much. I'm going to zoom out on this document, and if I hit Command 0, the document will now scale to fit into my available window, which is pretty nice. I can see that Lincoln is taking up more space than I would like in this particular project, so I'm going to click on the Lincoln layer. We always have to make sure that the layer is active when we are working with it, and I want to transform this layer. So we can do that by going under Edit and choose Free Transform. And when I do that, oh, now I'm going to have to zoom out because, as I said, this is it's a big one. When I shrink it down, it gives me handles. So now I can scale this image so that it's going to fit a little bit better on screen. And I can decide now, because of his shoulder is cut off on the left, but not, well, I guess both are cut off, so we'll move him down like this. And I can position it. Now if I put my cursor next to the corner, we'll see we get the little arrows, and I could rotate it if I wanted, which would be, I'm not quite sure why I would do that, but maybe just a little tilt adds some drama to the whole thing, so we will do that. And once I'm satisfied with my transformation, I either click Cancel or Accept, and I'll click on Accept. I want to pull this Lincoln down so I can see the other one and the gun. So if I go grab this gun up here, go back and select the Move tool, V on the keyboard, I can now move that to a location of my choosing. I can click on the other Abe layer, and by clicking directly on it with the Move tool, it selected that layer. And then I could position this Lincoln somewhere else into my document. If I want to move the White House around, I can now do that as well. So I can relocate that into my picture. If I want to get rid of the previous colored layers, I can do that. If I want the green to come back, and put that there. So as you can see, we have lots of freedom, lots of flexibility as we move things around and combine them to make an image. Next thing I want to point out is working with text. So if I grab the text tool, and we will see that it's defaulting to Myriad Pro. If I want to choose a different font, I can click there, and we have these other fonts that are available to us, or you can install fonts, which is something we will look at down the road, so you're able to have more font options. But with this, if I decide that I want to use Big Caslon as my option, we'll see we have text options up here as well as color. So I am going to just use that red color so it contrasts with the green. And now I will type in my title. Now when I look at this and select it, if I click back to the text tool so that it's active, I'm going to bring it up to the top because I want to guarantee it's on top of everything. It's kind of small, it's hard to see. So with that, we can take that and click on it and choose a bigger option for that text. If I go back and select the Move tool, I can now move that layer around. Oh, it really wasn't, no, because I was just above the green layer, not above the other ones. Like, why is it so far down? All right, key thing when you're working with text, don't put the text all the way up against the margins. There should always, or edges, there should always be some margin or spacing of the text unless you truly recommend or intend to be running it off. So if I really was trying to do that for some graphic or dramatic reason, then I could do it. But otherwise, the text should have some type of breathing room. Now, if I decide that this text is still not big enough and want to work with it, I can click on T to bring that up, and I could type in 120, and now that text has gotten bigger. And then I can move it around some more and position it. When I'm all done, I can save it. And if I want to submit a finished version of this draft, we have an option of quick export as PNG, which will allow us to kick this document out of here as a .png file. It's asking where do you want it to go. I'll let it go next to the main project, and there it is. And then when you're submitting files for assignments, you will submit them as PNGs.